Please welcome Mr. Rob Clark.
I won.
You won! Yeah. Hooray! Drinks are on, Rob. And the horse was?
Well, it came third, let's put it that way, but I got my money back, so that's all I care about.
Do you like a bit of a flutter?
Yeah, I do. This is a bit of a flutter, really, isn't it?
What, this or the formats business?
This and the formats business.
I mean, it's interesting in a way, isn't it? Because the idea of kind of backing your horse, taking a bet, is actually, in a funny way, quite a useful analogy, because very quickly, for those who don't know what the Director of Global Entertainment Development does, I imagine, in a way, it's finding horses and backing them.
An element of it is, I mean, you obviously, when you back a horse, you don't know that it's going to win, and you know a certain bit about it. And I don't really like betting unless I'm actually at the race course. Okay. Because when you're at the race course, you can see the horse and you can sense it and you get a better picture of it. But I just watched the Grand National on my phone while you were listening to Gary. So you don't really get a true sense of the atmosphere of the whole thing there. So I think that's, you know, I wouldn't put my money nor my reputation online unless I'd actually dug a little bit deeper with the format.
Okay. So tell us a little bit, paint a picture for us. Director of Global Entertainment Development, what is the day-to-day reality of that role?
To explain what the day-to-day reality is, I think I have to explain where it came from. And that was that Fremantle were very successful. They had a division called Worldwide Entertainment, which in the end of its sort of run, I was the president of. And that looked after everything. That looked after the whole sort of genesis of the format, the development of it, the acquisition of it, right the way through the marketing and then the production of it. And we were very successful over that period. And about 3 years ago, I took a sabbatical, and I was out for 9 months. And while I was away, I was thinking about this industry, and I'd come to the conclusion, which is really sort of what Gary was saying, I think, in that really it is all about what the next big thing is, well, it's actually a lot more than that. But it was about sort of where we go next, both as an industry and as a company, and also for myself, because I didn't want just to come back and just run a big division with big formats and all the rest of it. I wanted in some ways to get back to being a little bit more creative and a little bit more, the originating of it and everything. So we decided to split the two. So I took on development and acquisition, so all the pipeline, and then the production went into sort of the rest of Worldwide Entertainment. So that's so my job now is to set the creative agenda, to look for the next formats. But it's more important than that, because I think at these markets, television is all about the formats. But actually, television's not all about the formats. It's all about the programs, and the vast majority of programs aren't formatted. So it's to sort of align the agenda as well, that it shouldn't be just about global. It should be about local. It should be about regional. It should be about good content within television. And obviously, I can't be involved in every regional or local program. So it isn't necessarily about just finding the next big show. It's much more interesting than that, because I think that is like betting on the Grand National. Okay. You know, so it is about sort of a broad approach to both acquisition and to development within Fremantle.
Okay. It's interesting, isn't it? Because you say that you need local, you need regional, yeah. And yet, as Gary just made very clear, it is the big hits that have the ability to commercially transform the fortunes of a company like Fremantle. Well,
they do, but also because we have so many local territories, there's also there's an awful lot of shows out there. Right. There's an awful lot of schedule that could be filled. So whilst I agree with that, there's also there's an argument that to have truly creative companies, you need to you need a big, broad production base, which won't only come from making Idols, X Factor, and the talent shows and the game shows and all the reality shows we have. It can also come from just local shows that have been either designed within the company or designed with the broadcaster for that particular slot. And it's all about building relationships and getting the trust from a creative point of view. I don't want Fremantle to just be a big global company that sends out sort of formats constantly. I want that, but I also want the producers and the development teams to feel that they can operate within their own territory and within their own region, the same way that a smaller production company would. So I want it all, basically.
You're a greedy bastard.
Yeah, I know, I am a greedy bastard.
It's interesting, so Marco was talking earlier about the need for that local origination, the need for that local creativity, and actually the fact that no one knows if something's ever going to become a global hit. It has to work locally and then take it from there.
Look, when you're looking for a global sort of hit, if somebody calls me, I have a big pot of money, right? So somebody will say, Rob, we think we've got a really good show here. And the sort of, obviously, the amount of sort of backing I will give it, both in personal time, in money, in sort of the resources that I can send from the centre out to the different territories, depends on sort of what we think that the eventual benefit will be of that. So I'm now looking for a format called Black Swan, by the way, set in 17th century England. So if anybody's got one, come and see me this week. So you know basically that there are certain pillars that you need within that format. So it needs to be transferable because it can't be something that's so about the local territory that it couldn't be played anywhere else. So it needs to be culturally transferable. It needs to be returnable because you don't want to put a lot of development money in a show that can only play once. Now, sometimes broadcasters like that. If you go back, particularly Fox like those sorts of shows, you know. But they're not a good business model in the long run because you spend all that time and effort designing it, developing it, going through the production process, and then you can't bring it back. So returnability is really essential. And then scalable, because for Fremantle, we need to be able to make a show in all sorts of different budget ranges. So sort of, you know, I've just had a text message. We've just won the big talent show contest in Indonesia that's just on air now for X Factor. Well, the budget for X Factor in Indonesia looks very different to the budget to X Factor in the UK, you know? These shows need to be scalable. So if they've got those three tenets that are in place, and then they've had a serious think about whether it has a digital policy. Now, I would never have said that 5 years ago. But they need to have really looked at whether there's a digital side to that. Then we can sort of start talking about sort of what sort of support we give it and all the rest of it. But if it hasn't got those, it doesn't mean that we don't do it. It can still be a fantastic show for whatever country it comes from. But it just doesn't mean that it's going to be a big hitter for Fremantle as a group. It might be great for Fremantle Belgium or whatever, you know?
It's interesting. I mean, I've sat at the heart of one of these big groups, and obviously this is very much your day-to-day thing. How does the centralised bit of Fremantle support? Is it financial? Is it?
Yeah, the sort of look. I never went into television to end up being a big corporate person within a big television company. That's not why I came to Fremantle, and it took them a long time to persuade me 10 years ago that this was something that I should do. And I suppose that my resistance to it was that it sounded terribly corporate and it sounded a long way from the studio floor and all the things that I came into television that I was passionate about and that I wanted to do. So for me, I think one of the things that's sort of really important is that we decorporatize the sort of whole process. So there's not a lot of form filling. There's not a lot of burdens pressed on people to do that sort of thing. It's an industry that is primarily about people. And if you get the right people in the right places, and you can get your global network working so that it adds rather than subtracts, then I think that it can work very well. So to go back to your question, I think there are a number of areas that we can offer it. I can sort of offer my advice, which sometimes is worthwhile asking for, and other times is not, depending on whether I like it or not. And I'm quite blunt. You know, I don't beat around the bush. If I don't like something, I say I don't like it. But I also have always added the sort of line, but I'm not always right. And I'm not always right. And I don't think anybody's always right. But somebody has to be the one that says this is good or this is bad. And then they can argue with me. And if they win that argument, then great. Because if they've got no passion about that idea, then it's not a very good idea. You know, these shows that Gary was talking about that have been hugely successful are because people were really passionate about them and they really cared for them. They're not just, oh, let's design a show and let's go and make it. It doesn't work like that. You know, you lose sleep over it. In some cases, you have heart attacks over it, you know? In some cases, you have 2 heart attacks over it, you know? So this is really, really sort of important stuff. So I can offer my advice. I have a team of people who I work with who have been in the industry for a long time. I encourage everybody to sort of talk to them, not just me. Often they go to them first and then come to me. And also, I'm a really big believer that the network is not a centralized network. So I don't see Fremantle as being a spoke company. I don't sit in the middle creatively and everyone else is out there. I want it to be a network. So I encourage everybody to talk to everybody else. And I really don't mind if I'm almost frozen out of that situation, as long as at some point they tell me what the hell they're doing. I don't mind that. I'm not a control freak in that sense. And I think sometimes it's better to do it that way because they trust each other, they're in the field, they may be much more up to date about things than I am. But then it comes to me eventually, and then because I'm that bit removed, I can sort of sometimes look at it and say, I really like it, but, you know, what about this bit? What about that bit? What about... So there's that side. So that's the sort of process of development, if you like, just talking and going out and filming. I can give money, so I can give sort of quite substantial amounts of money for development, for piloting, for whatever they want to do.
And out of interest, just mean, how important do you think that is that the big groups have this financial firepower, that they can pay for pilots, that they can pay for development?
I think it's really important because I don't think that broadcasters have got the same... I'm going to say it. I don't think broadcasters have got the same balls that they used to. I think that there used to be that, you know, the prize is so great now, but actually the downside is so heavy of a failed series that, understandably, they are more cautious about things. They say they're not, but they are. So they often want a format that's worked somewhere else. Well, if everybody only goes for a format that works somewhere else, no one will ever get a show on air. So, you know, it's good that we have the resources to be able to sort of pilot. But one of the things that I'm really insistent on is that we pilot with a broadcaster. Right. Because they have to believe in it as well. It shouldn't be that at the end of the day we just come and deliver them a pilot. You know, they need to sort of have some skin in the game.
So the Fremantle model is very much that you co-fund with the broadcaster. Yeah. You wouldn't go out and fund a full pilot.
We might go out and fund a full pilot, but I would prefer the first.
Sure.
You know, it's much better because then you have a route to market. You have a broadcaster that's as passionate as you are. They've put sort of some of their money on the line as well as you have. But we also do this with not just Fremantle companies. We do this with other companies. So we've got a show at this market which is called 12 Steps, which is a Dutch pilot of a game show. SBS are interested as a broadcaster. The production company is Park Lane, you know, who we've worked with before. Willem, we had the rights for the phone for a while with him. And we work with lots and lots and lots of different companies because it's not just about sort of the brains trust, if you like, being within Fremantle. It's about tapping into clever people with original ideas somewhere in the industry. And so I sort of see some of my role as being an industry-wide role because I sort of, you know, so if you look at Ireland, at the moment we've worked with Wacker, Big Mountain, Animo, Kite. So, you know, so in lots of territories we work with lots of different production companies. You know, we're representing Benefit Street at this market from Love. We're representing a Canadian format from, God, what are they called? Three Birds, I think. Three Birds. Varsha. What are they called?
We'll draw a veil over that.
But, you know, they're sort of, You know, so it's really important that that I fought very hard to get acquisition as well as development under this role. Because for me, it's no good Fremantle having one hand clapping. You know, we need a pipeline, and a pipeline for Fremantle is everything that's out there that we like, that we can sort of acquire and help and work with. And that used to be when something had gone on air. I've had this conversation with you before, I think. You know, 10 years ago, The Apprentice launched, it went on air, it got 18 million, and we bought The Apprentice. You know, it cost a lot, but we bought it. We were guaranteed a hit, you know, 18 million on NBC on a wet Wednesday, fabulous. It was, and we sold it all around the world. And it doesn't work like that. So it goes back to the horse racing analogy. You know, now you're not betting on a horse that's about to cross the line. You're betting on a horse that's sort of somewhere wandering around the paddock. So people come and see you with just paper formats, and you're looking at who they are, what's their track record, who they're working with, what broadcaster may be interested, what country may be interested, what the subject matter is, you know, everything. Sure. There's a sort of real, you know, mixture of things that you're interested in.
It's interesting at the moment, because I don't know about you, but looking at the industry at the moment, it does seem to be a bit of a period of kind of almost creative stagnation. It almost seems as though we're waiting for one of Gary's next black swans to turn up.
I don't think, you see, I think Gary's right about the black swan, actually. I think that you never know when a hit's coming, and invariably that hit will not be something that any of us have actually thought it would be. But I don't think the industry is stagnating. No. I think the industry is extraordinarily creative at the moment. And I think that this MIP will be the sign of that. I think there's an awful lot of great formats around, and there's a lot of great people, and it seems that I'm a great believer in the cyclical nature of television, and I think that's, having been around for as long as I have, you know, I've heard so many people say, oh, music's dead, you know, I was told as a producer that music was dead, no one ever wanted a music show. Well, go away and look at sort of your schedules in the territories that you live in, and tell me if music's dead. And it isn't. Nothing's ever dead. It's just how you retell the story. You know, and if you can retell the story of music like Idols originally did, and then X Factor, and then The Voice, then, you know, then obviously music is not dead. But you need to listen and sort of work hard about sort of how you tell that story, and listen to what sort of people are telling you without necessarily knowing that's what they're telling you.
I mean, talking briefly about music, I mean, Gary gave Rising Star a bit of a going over, I think would perhaps be the fairest way of putting it. There is an extraordinary amount of heat around it as a show. There's rumours of silly deals. Do you think that's a sign of the strength of the show, broadcast to desperation to try and almost kind of hope it's a hit, or both?
Well, look,
or neither?
I hate talking about other people's shows, so I'm not going to talk about the content of it because I don't think that's fair. But I will talk about what a hit is. And a hit is not made by me, you, or anybody else in this audience unless we sit there and turn on our television. A hit show is a show that audiences watch. And in Israel, it was a qualified hit. So it hasn't been made anywhere else yet. It has sold very well. So I would describe it like this. It's a show that was marketed and sold extremely well. And it's yet to prove itself in terms of how it engages with a wider audience. And Israel's a fantastically creative market. It's an amazing market. You go over there and you feel the energy. It's an amazingly young environment, the television world there. And I think that's a really important aspect to it. It's completely linked in with the digital and the traditional TV. Is completely linked. There's no separation between the two. And I think that's really important. But it is a very different country to the USA, and it's a very different country to sort of, you know, lots of other big markets. So whether it will transfer or not, I don't know. And I'm not about to sort of get into that. But it's not a hit yet.
Right. Okay.
And when it gets sort of, you know, 15, 20 million in the US, when it launches on ABC, then we can call it a hit. But if it doesn't get that, it ain't a hit. Full stop.
Gary asked an interesting question, actually, which is what is the next Israel, was his kind of final kind of parting question. The formats business has traditionally been driven by the UK, US, and Holland. Israel now is this kind of, you know, creative hotbed. Why do you think that is, that the kind of the net is being spread wider? And also, what do you think is the next Israel? Ireland?
Well, I don't think that, look, let's get Israel in context. Right, it's a really creative place, but it's a tiny place. And there are oodles of successful formats out of Israel. You know, it's just a good place that makes great television and will continue to make great television, and I think we will buy. What's more interesting is the whole concentration on one new territory is missing the point. The point is that the television industry has been completely globalized. That's the bigger picture. It's not about Israel. The big picture is that historically, formats came from 3 countries. Came from the Dutch, basically because of iWorks and Endemol and other companies. It came from the US, from the big networks, and it came from the UK because of its decentralized policy and its rights policy and all of its vast independent sector and some of the big beasts that are based in London. So that was the sort of state of the industry. But there's always been 1 or 2 good shows every market that have come from outside. If you walk around this market, you will see that those shows are no longer centered around those 3 countries. You know, there will be shows worth looking at and worth taking note of from all sorts of places. Places that weren't traditionally the creators, they were the consumers. So I think what's fascinating about television at the moment, and what's fascinating about my job, is that there's the sort of, within my title, there's the global element to it. And that's what I find really interesting, because I'm absolutely certain that the next big show can come from somewhere within the world. And that's the only thing I'm certain of. But it's not necessarily going to come from the big 3. It may come from Israel. It may come from Japan. It may come from Ireland. It may come from Holland. It may come from Scandinavia. It could be Argentinian. It could be Brazilian. It could be Canadian. You know, all of these places have got hugely creative and broad-based sort of production companies, production industries now. And the next show could come from there. Eventually, it will have to go through one of the big 3.
I was going to ask you that also, but also, do you think for that show really to become a global hit, do you think one of the big groups needs to pick it up and get behind
Absolutely
it?
it does. Right. No, I don't. But I think what I don't necessarily think it has to be Oz, Endemol or Shine or whoever.
No, but do you think it's going to have to be something that you acquire at some point in the process for it to become a genuinely global hit?
No, because Paul Smith managed to roll out Millionaire without that. So I don't necessarily believe that's the case. But I do believe that it has to be successfully managed, and it has to be successful on those big territories. And certainly, if you're a small independent company, particularly from outside of those big 3, it would be extraordinarily difficult to deal with some of those broadcasters and do the right deals and manage the quality. Because it's not about selling these shows, it's about producing them. And that's the big thing for me, you know. I've never sold a show in my life, really, but I've produced lots of shows, and I've overseen lots of people producing shows, and I've seen lots of shows developed and developed shows. So it's about that. If you get that creative sort of melting pot right, then you can produce a show fantastically well. You can sell it well, you can produce it well. If it works, you can sell it for even more. You know, you can build your budgets, you can produce it fantastically, and you can produce it for years and years and years. And that's the goal. The goal is not, you know, if you look at this market over the last few years, right? So we all got terribly excited 3 markets ago, I think it was, about a show called Splash, right? Well, you know, Splash was very exciting. You know, it was a good idea. It did very well in Holland. And if I'd have been a broadcaster, I would have bought it. But no broadcaster could surely have bought that show thinking in 5 years' time it's still going to be on air, because it didn't have the depth of interest, really. Sure. Or, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that we were all so excited by it, you know? It was sort of everywhere, wasn't it? And then last market, it was Rising Star. You know, we can't get overly excited about at this market because we haven't seen anything yet. We haven't seen anything from outside Israel. So, you know, that's of less interest. At this market, I don't know, there's always a star, And quite often that star doesn't do as well. It's often the show. I remember bringing what's it called? Got Talent. Nearly forgot the name of the show. I remember bringing Got Talent to the market, right? And it was a real slow burner. People sat there, they thought, oh, that's quite a good show. But it didn't fly off the, didn't fly off the stand. But, sort of 10 years, 8 years later, with the exception of Australia, it's still on everywhere else.
We've got to leave it there. Rob, thank you very much indeed. Mr. Rob Clark.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fantastic.